What walks in shadow? A tale from the hollow. I've spent my life in these mountains. 5 generations of my family are buried in the soil beneath the ancient oaks that crown the ridges of eastern Kentucky. The Appalachian wilderness is in my blood. I know its moods, its secrets, the language it speaks to those patient enough to listen. But there are places even I won't go after sundown. The locals call it Blackthorn Hollow. It doesn't appear on any official maps, though some old Forest Service documents from the 1930s make reference to it before abruptly redacting its location from future surveys. The hiking trails loop conspicuously around it, creating a negative space in the otherwise comprehensive coverage of our mountains. I first heard about it as a child, when my grandfather would speak of it in whispers after his 3rd glass of bourbon. "The hollow breathes," he'd say, eyes fixed on something beyond our cabin walls. "It breathes and sometimes it hungers." I dismissed these as the superstitions of an old mountaineer, until I found myself lost in unfamiliar woods 3 summers ago, storm clouds gathering with unnatural speed overhead. The first thing you notice in Blackthorn Hollow is the silence. Not the peaceful quiet of normal woods, but the oppressive absence of sound that presses against your eardrums. The birds go silent. The insects cease their chorus. Even the wind seems to die away as though the air itself is holding its breath. The trees grow differently there, twisted black trunks with bark patterns that almost resemble faces frozen in expressions of warning. The forest floor is carpeted with a species of moss I've never seen documented in any regional field guide, a deep crimson variety that feels unnaturally warm to the touch, as though pulsing with its own internal body heat. I made camp as the storm broke, the rain falling in sheets that seemed to isolate my small tent from the rest of the world. That's when I heard it, a soft, rhythmic sound cutting through the downpour. Footsteps circling my camp, too deliberate to be an animal, too irregular to be human. I called out, thinking perhaps another hiker had become stranded. No response came, yet the footsteps continued, growing neither closer nor more distant, just circling for hours. Near midnight, the rain stopped with unnatural suddenness. The footsteps ceased. I peered through the tent flap and saw nothing but silver moonlight illuminating the mist that clung to the crimson moss. Then I noticed the arrangement of stones around my tent, 13 smooth river rocks placed in a perfect circle that hadn't been there when I made camp. I've been a forester for 20 years. I've encountered bears, wildcats, and all manner of wildlife. Nothing has ever raised the hairs on my neck like those stones, placed with deliberate purpose by something that had watched me sleep. As dawn approached, I heard voices, distant at first, like a congregation murmuring prayers. They grew closer, though I could see no one through the thinning mist. The language wasn't English, nor any modern tongue I recognized. The syllables were guttural, with sounds no human throat should produce. I packed quickly, planning to hike out with first light. That's when I noticed the tree. It stood directly behind my tent, a massive ancient blackthorn with a trunk nearly 6 feet in diameter. I'm certain it hadn't been there the night before. No tree of that size could have escaped my notice when making camp. Even more disturbing were the markings carved into its bark, symbols similar to those found in some of the oldest Cherokee pictographs, but distorted, as though transcribed by someone who fundamentally misunderstood their purpose. At the center of this arrangement was a crude representation of a human figure with too many limbs, surrounded by 13 smaller circles. As I studied these carvings, I noticed something seeping from between them. Not sap, but a clear, viscous fluid that smelled of copper and something else I couldn't identify. Where it touched the crimson moss, the plant matter seemed to writhe and reach toward it. I felt watched, not by anything as simple as eyes, but by an awareness that seemed to emanate from the forest itself. The feeling of being assessed, categorized, and, most disturbing of all, recognized. I left everything but my water bottle and compass, fleeing through the morning mist. I swear the trees shifted position as I ran, creating corridors that led me deeper into the hollow despite my desperate attempts to find higher ground. Twice I found myself back at my abandoned campsite, the blackthorn tree now bearing different carvings, crude representations of a running figure. Me. The third time I stumbled back to the clearing, I found something that stopped me cold. A photograph. My photograph. It had been taken the previous Christmas at my sister's house in Lexington, hundreds of miles away. It lay atop the crimson moss, edges blackened as though burned, my face scratched out with something sharp. How it came to be there I cannot explain. I had not brought it with me. I had never printed that particular digital image. As I stood frozen, trying to process this impossibility, I heard a sound from behind the blackthorn tree. A wet, sliding noise, like something massive pulling itself across the forest floor. The crimson moss rippled as though disturbed by currents beneath it. I ran again, blindly this time with no regard for direction. I don't know how long I fled, only that eventually the silence gave way to normal forest sounds. Birds returned. The moss beneath my feet was the familiar green. I collapsed beside a stream I recognized. I had somehow emerged nearly 7 miles from where I'd entered the woods, though I'd been traveling in what I believed was the opposite direction. I've spoken to other locals since then, collecting stories passed down through generations. They describe similar encounters spanning centuries, lost hunters finding stone circles, colonial settlers reporting trees that moved in the night, lumber crews in the 1920s abandoning equipment after 3 men disappeared while felling trees in the breathing woods. Most disturbing are the consistent reports of people finding personal items in the hollow, things that should have been impossible to obtain. A Civil War soldier's diary describes finding his wife's hairbrush hanging from a tree branch, though she was hundreds of miles away. A trapper in 1887 reported discovering his childhood toy whittled from birchwood sitting atop a stone altar deep in the hollow, though he'd lost it 30 years earlier in another state. Whatever dwells in Blackthorn Hollow doesn't just observe, it knows you. It reaches beyond physical boundaries to touch the artifacts of your existence. It leaves signs that it could take more than just objects if it chose. I've never returned to those woods, but sometimes, on particularly still nights, I wake to find crimson moss growing outside my bedroom window. By morning it's gone, leaving no trace but a lingering warmth on the glass. Last week, I received a package with no return address. Inside was my tent, the one I abandoned 3 years ago. It had been carefully folded, each crease precise, each stake cleaned and aligned. Nestled in its center was a river stone, smooth and black with a single word carved into its surface in those same distorted Cherokee characters. My name, the hollow remembers, and I fear that one day it will call me back.